and Reconciliation of the Episcopal Diocese of the Central Gulf Coast. My name is Susan Miller, and I serve on the Commission. The Commission on Racial Justice and Reconciliation's mission statement reads as follows. As members of the Jesus Movement, our mission is to dismantle individual and institutional racism by sharing resources and creating opportunities that inspire and empower faith communities and the larger community, resulting in reconciliation and restoration of all God's people. So how do we go about doing this? We do this by telling the truth of what has transpired. For how can you be reconciled to another without an acknowledgement of a wrong that was done? We go about telling the truth through our pilgrimages, through our racial reconciliation workshops, and our speaker series, which is why you are here tonight. We are delighted you have joined us this evening. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to let you know that you can submit questions through the chat box, which should be located at the bottom or side of your computer screen. We will get to those questions at the conclusion of the speaker's presentation. We are very pleased this evening to have the Reverend Carolyn Foster as our speaker. Reverend Foster is a deacon of the Episcopal Diocese of Alabama, and she serves at St. Mark's Episcopal Church in Birmingham, Alabama. She is co-chair of the Episcopal Diocese Commission on Truth, Justice, and Racial Reconciliation. She has led anti-racism workshops for over 18 years. She is the Faith and Community Coordinator for Greater Birmingham Ministries, a 50-year-old direct services and social justice organization where she engages with GBM's 20 interfaith sponsoring congregations. Reverend Foster is a leader of the Alabama Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, a movement that continues the work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The Poor People's Campaign works to dismantle the unjust systems of racism, poverty, ecological devastation, and the war economy which adversely impact poor and low-income people. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the Reverend Carolyn Foster.
Thank you so much, Susan. And thank you for all of you who are signing in and continue to sign in. I can't tell you how delighted I am to be here with you, and thank Gary and Joe and members of the commission for inviting me to be a part of this speaker series. When I was asked to participate and to choose the date that I was able to do it, I actually chose this date because I was asked to speak about the Poor People's Campaign, and we have a huge, huge, momentous occasion coming up this weekend that you'll hear a little bit more about. And this date was the one that was closest to our national event on Saturday. So I'm gonna be giving you start off with some historical information about the Poor People's Campaign and where we are now with the campaign and where we hope to go in the next few days as it leads into our big event this weekend and going forward. So I'm going to ask for the first slide. This picture is actually a picture that was taken on the steps of the state capitol in Alabama. On the very first day when we launched this new iteration of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But the Poor People's Campaign is actually a relaunch of the vision that Dr. King had in 1968. He was in the process of pulling together low-income Black, white, Latino, and Native American and immigrants, because all of those groups were wrestling with issues as it relates to systemic poverty, systemic racism, and militarism. We were in the middle of the Vietnam War at the time. And he was beginning to, you know, we had passed the Voting Rights Act and the Voting Rights Bill, and now he was focusing on systemic poverty and systemic racism in particular. The next slide, please, and don't start it just yet. Let me kind of intro it. And his vision to bring poor people together was about lifting up the voices of poor people so that they themselves can speak their own truths to power and to be what he called a new unsettling force in this country. And so this is a short little video just to sort of talk a little bit about that vision. You can start the video.
The last 2 months of his life, Dr. King faced the idea that civil rights alone could not solve the problem of poverty. He roamed the South, trying to gain support for Poor People's Campaign. Its goals: full employment, a guaranteed income, and decent housing for every American.
The campaign would recruit among all races, bring them to Washington, force the government to respond. A nonviolent army of the poor.
All working together to solve the problem of poverty. We're tired of working full-time jobs for part-time income, and we are tired of not being able to find work. And it didn't cost the nation 1 penny to integrate lunch count. It didn't cost the nation 1 penny to guarantee the right to vote. Now we are dealing with issues that cannot be solved without the nation spending billions of dollars and undergoing a radical redistribution of economic power. Yes. If our nation can spend $35 billion a year to fight an unjust, evil war in Vietnam, and $20 billion to put a man on the moon, it can spend billions of dollars to put God's children on their own 2 feet right here on earth. This is a reality. Now, when we come to Washington, we're coming to get our check. Very frankly, this is a search for an alternative to riot. The riot is the language of the unheard. What is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. All we say to America is be true to what you're saying on paper. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But if a man doesn't have a job or an income, he has neither life nor liberty, and the possibility for the pursuit of happiness. He merely exists. We are demanding an emergency program to provide employment for everyone in need of a job. Or, if a work program is impractical, a guaranteed annual income at levels that sustain life in decent circumstances. This is a new beginning on the economic front.
The Poor People's Campaign was about economics. And what happened to that whole movement? It's almost as if it wasn't. It just.
Wait a minute. It didn't disappear. You might forget Martin Luther King was assassinated in April. The Poor People's Campaign was supposed to go to Washington in April. So the organization that mobilized it was essentially decapitated and thrown into chaos about 3 weeks before it was supposed to happen.
The realistic fact is that we still have a long, long way to go. Now, I'm not one to lose hope. I keep on hoping. I still have faith in the future. Are we going to march again? And we've got to march again. People will come to see that not only is something wrong in general, but something is wrong in particular in their own economic situations. Constantly trying to make ends meet, but because of either no job or a job that is so economically unprofitable that the person can't make ends meet. And I think they see all of these things, and more they're coming to see them.
Okay. So this picture is from the meeting that he had with grassroots leaders in March of 1968, 1 month before he was assassinated. He brought together poor people from all ethnic groups who began to see their commonality rather than being divided because of race or creed. They began to see that they had what they had in common. And so this picture was actually taken from one of those grassroots meetings in 1968. The next one, please. This is a group of Native American youth who came together and had joined the Poor People's Campaign. I don't know if you can read the quote here, but I'll try to read it for you. We have joined the Poor People's Campaign because most of us know that our families, tribes, and communities number among the suffering in this country. We are not begging, we are demanding what is rightfully ours. This is no more than the right to have a decent life in our communities. We need guaranteed jobs, guaranteed income, housing, schools, economic development, but most important, we want these things on our own terms. So this was a group of Native American youth who had come together and joined the Poor People's Campaign. Next slide. And here's a group of called Join Community Unions. It was a group of low-income white people. Peggy Terry was one of the leaders in that group, and she spoke on a Poor People's Campaign Solidarity Day in 1968, and she said, "Poor whites are here today to make ourselves visible to a society whose continued existence depend on the denial of our existence. We are here today united with other races of poor people, Puerto Ricans, Mexican Americans, Indians, and Black people in a common cause. That common cause is freedom." Next slide. And here is a quote from a Puerto Rican group that also became a part of the Poor People's Campaign. And they said, "Changing America's approach to poverty can only be accomplished from a position of organized strength. That strength can only spring from an organized coalition of poor people that cuts across ethnic, racial, and geographic lines. This is where we stand as Puerto Ricans. This is where we stand as poor persons and as part of the Poor People's Campaign." And next slide. And then of course, Poor Blacks, who organized a wagon train. And if you can't see that picture, it says, "Don't laugh because Jesus was a poor man." They organized on their way to to a meeting and actually did it with a wagon train. And they said, "History has taught it is not enough for people to be angry. The supreme task is to organize and unite people so that their anger becomes a transforming force." So you can see that Dr. King in 1968 was in the process of bringing people across all barriers together who the one thing that they had in common was their poverty. And the next slide. And this is a political cartoon from 1968 that depicts this very scenario of showing the feet and legs of American Indian, Puerto Ricans, it says, poor whites, and Blacks. And if you can look between the walking or the marching, these are a group of legislators whispering to one another. And the caption says, "What worries me, Senator, is that they are getting into step." And that's what was happening. A lot of people feel like that's one of the reasons that King was really assassinated, because he was beginning to bring this new unsettling force of people together to work on economic issues. And a lot of people think that that was one of the reasons why they really began to see him as being dangerous in this country. Okay, next. And so 2 years ago, well, actually it started about 4 years ago, Reverend Dr. William Barber and Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris, who both were working on poverty and systemic justice issues separately, decided to join forces when they noticed that we were coming up on the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's death. And those same issues that Dr. King was wrestling with and was bringing people together to help overcome, systemic racism, systemic poverty, and militarism still existed. Reverend Barber was at the time president of the North Carolina NAACP, and he was head and still is head of a nonprofit called Repairers of the Breach. And Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris runs an organization in New York called the Kairos Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice. So they decided to join forces and to lift up the work that Dr. King envisioned, but was interrupted due to his assassination. So in 2016, they began to travel all over the country with what they called the moral revival. They invigorated the old mass meetings of old, just like the civil rights movement did, and got organized around church and around music and around good preaching about why this was important. So in 2016, we in Alabama was fortunate enough to host him twice. Both times I think were in Birmingham for mass meetings and training. And we began people started coming to the mass meetings and signing up to be a part of this moral revival. It was not, it hadn't been announced at that time that it was going to be the Poor People's Campaign, just that this country needed a moral revival. But later in the year, they traveled all over the country, started gaining support. People were signing up to be a part of this moral revival. And then later in 2016, during those times, they were listening to stories of people who were impacted by poverty, by racism, and collecting these stories, and we call them testifiers, people who are directly impacted by these issues. So the next slide is actually a video of announcing, or actually a promotional video about these gatherings, these mass meetings.
Troubling of the war.
God respects the poor. God exalts the poor. God cares for the poor. God feeds the poor. God remembers the poor. God helps the poor.
So when Jesus quotes this Deuteronomy 15, he quotes this phrase not because he's condoning poverty that way, but he's reminding us that God hates poverty. God has commanded us to end poverty by forgiving debts, by raising wages, by outlawing slavery, by restructuring society around the needs of the poor. And that you'll only have the poor with you always if we're disobedient to God and God's will and God's commandment.
My friends, economic sustainability, living wages is a moral issue. Education is a moral issue. Healthcare is a moral issue. The environment is a moral issue. Addressing the disparities in our criminal justice system impact Black, brown, and poor white people is a moral issue. Protecting and expanding voting rights and immigrant rights and LGBTQ rights and women's rights and Native Americans and labor issues, those are moral issues.
And right now,
Because of the lawmakers blocking health care, we can't get the medical insurance or the assistance that we need. No parent in America should have to bear that for a lack of medical space.
I tried my best, and within 2 months of senior year of high school, I was accepted to college. First one in my family, first one in my neighborhood. But then I received an email. The email was something like this: because you have undocumented parents, you must pay out-of-state tuition. And if you know what the price out-of-state tuition is, then you know that for families like me, for families who are first generation here, it's financially impossible.
I'm an educated woman. I'm a privileged woman. I can speak 3 languages. I have gas in my car, food on my table, money in my pocket. Here I am, a grown woman, a mother to a daughter who, on many days, too many that I'm ashamed to admit, afraid to walk out of my home with this thing on my head, the hijab.
I got a 10-year-old son, his name is Deacon, and I had to have a conversation with him. I had to have a conversation with him of how he needed to act if the police ever stopped him. I had to tell my 10-year-old son that if they stop you, don't move too fast. If they stop you, put your hands up so they can see your hands. If they stop you, be polite. Say, yes, sir. Because it's more important for you to come home right now than anything else. It is important that if they stop you, that you listen to their commands and don't move too fast. Too many of the brothers are getting killed. We have to do something as a group.
Sometimes God makes a thing created to move us from lip syncing to action.
We are humbled to host this holy convocation for the purposes of Tikkun Olam, to repair our world, to heal a world that sorely needs healing.
Today we stand as truth tellers, witnessing to the pain and the suffering caused by the injustices within our community and across our country. We gather to declare that we need a moral revival, a radical revolution of value, and we are called on the prophets of old from the sacred text of the world's religions.
We come together, red, yellow, black, and white, people of faith, for sustainability, for humanity, for our children, for 7 generations to come.
Tonight we stand to replace legislation of fear with statutes of surety, manifestations of hate with respect for all humanity, from those of every faith and non-faith, and the baleful devastation of greed with a promise to uphold the well-being of every individual, regardless of race, gender, religion, nationality, culture, or creed.
We join voice with voice until all are heard, and arm in arm until all are seen.
God is recruiting. I want to know, are you willing to be a part of that association? Are you willing to say, here my Lord, send me?
No more standing down. We are going to fight for the heart and the soul of America with every breath we have.
Together. Organize together. Fight for the heart of this nation. Hallelujah.
I hope you noticed that the diversity in the crowd of races, of religions, this is really just a reignition of Dr. King's vision. Reverend Barber is a student of Dr. King, and everything that we have been doing since we launched the Poor People's Campaign is just what Dr. King had envisioned. So when you saw all of the various churches and you saw the different races and you saw the different religions included, that's exactly what Dr. King had in mind. So why do we need a Poor People's Campaign? I want you to look at this graph and notice, look at our particular states. This is the, this is from actually to the figures from 2014, but they haven't changed much. These are the states that are impacted by poverty, the poverty line. And the darkest purple indicates poverty below 20%. And then the next shade up, sort of a dark lavender color, are states that have poverty between 17 and 20%. And you can see that Alabama is in that group. And then parts of Florida is in the 14 to the 16 percentile in terms of the poverty rate in the state. Okay, next slide. Now let's look at the child poverty rate. Again, look at Alabama and look at Florida, because those are the two states that we are involved in. And you can see what states have the most poverty, are mostly, you know, our states and the southern states. Child poverty, and this is children under the age of 18. Next slide. States that have not expanded Medicaid, and that was as of 2017. And you see our states. Okay, next slide. States that do not have living wage legislation. Alabama's not looking pretty good right about now. You see that? Okay, next slide. States that do not have discrimination laws against LGBTQ community. And then the next slide. And the states that proclaim to be Bible-believing evangelicals. So there's a disconnect between, in my opinion, between people who profess Christianity, I'll just say that, and evangelicalism, but yet are not, I don't want to say not bothered by poverty or lack of health care and those kinds of things, but we should be paying more attention to that, because that's who is my neighbor is one of the tenets of our faith. Who is our neighbor? And the story of the Good Samaritan. So if you look at those and overlay those, all 4 or 5 of these slides, maybe 6 of them, you can see the states that are most impacted by poverty, child poverty, lack of Medicaid expansion, lack of living wage, and lack of discrimination laws, and yet, and the highest concentration of people who profess to be Protestant evangelicals. So that is why we need a Poor People's Campaign. And I mentioned that under Dr. King, the 3 tenets that he was focusing on in 1968 was systemic racism, systemic poverty, and the war economy. And so in this new relaunch of it, we've added 2 more, because we've added ecological devastation, because lack of clean water, and many of you probably know about this raw sewage in Lowndes County in Alabama. Those kinds of things are always in low income areas where poor people are directly impacted by that. So we've added ecological devastation. And then the 5th one is trying to confront that distorted moral narrative that we are hearing today. So those are the 5 tenets of the Poor People's Campaign. So we were trained during 2016 and 17, and then we were ready to launch this new Poor People's Campaign in 2018. Next slide. At that time, we had 30 states that had formed committees, formed movements of the Poor People's Campaign. We're not an organization, we're a movement. So we don't have an office. We have to raise our own money locally. But we are just like the civil rights movement of old. people donate, you know, to the cause and that kind of thing, but we are a movement. So when we were ready to launch it in May of 2018, we were going to, for 40 days straight, we were going to meet on our state capitals, have a rally and a nonviolent direct action as it related to those things that I mentioned. This was one of our gatherings at the very beginning. So the first week we wanted to lift up, which was a Mother's Day weekend, we wanted to lift up the fact that somebody is hurting our people and has gone on far too long. And our speakers for that particular rally was around women in poverty, children in poverty, and the disabled in poverty. And you can read the rest of these for our focus for these next 6 weeks. So I want to share with you another slide from the 40 days of action. After we had done all 40 days in the 30 states, this is the video that was produced from a news account.
Are sleeping on the street. For a country that's rich, to have so many people poor, it's immoral and it's wrong.
Our backs are against the wall, and we got no choice but to push.
All of that breaking news in Albany, where a large group of protesters have moved into the street.
Washington Avenue between City Hall and Lark Street closed down.
Protesters with the Poor People's Campaign of Indiana.
2 o'clock on the East Coast, 2 o'clock in the middle, 2 o'clock on the West Coast. A wave, and the historians tell us it's never happened before.
Our communities, Muslim communities, who have joined the Poor People's Campaign, you can count on us.
Our democracy is in trouble. Our democracy is in trouble. And we come to demand. And we come to demand.
Because it's crucial that we make ourselves heard. No one is listening. We write letters, we make calls. No one is listening. So we gotta find a way to make ourselves heard.
We are the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And we are here. We are poor. We are burning. And we're here to say to our nation's capital and to the highest court of this land that everybody has a right to live. Everybody has a right to learn. Everybody has a right to love. Everybody has a right to living wages. Everybody has a right to vote. Everybody has a right to thrive in this society. Everybody say, oh! I believe that we will win. I believe that we will win. We don't fight. On us out of life.
Before the clergy, we read Article 6 of the Kentucky State Constitution that says we have a right to free assembly.
We are demanding that we stop the war on our poor.
There will be a movement that will break through the town and bring people together to save the heart and the soul of this democracy and this world.
So for 40 days straight, we showed up at our state capitals and had a rally on the steps of the state capitol and a protest. And this is a picture from our first week. All of the states were asked to do the same direct action that first week, which was just to block a main artery in your downtown area as a way of saying, we can't go down this road anymore. So that's what this picture is from. Our, what we call moral witnesses, people who put themselves up to be arrested if it came to that, blocked traffic. And this is actually from that arrest. So you can skip this next one because that's another video, and let's go to that one, the next one. Go ahead and pass that one. Okay, and these are some more pictures from some of our direct actions. The one on the left was the week 3 when we were protesting militarism. all of these were done on a Monday, and that Monday happened to be Jeff Davis' birthday, and everything was closed down. And so we decided to do a direct action against Jeff Davis' statue. So we shrouded it, as you can see, and our moral witness tied themselves to it and got arrested for defacing the statue. And the picture on the right was from week 5, when we were protesting against poor education and living conditions and lack of living wage. So we entered into this state Board of Education state building and occupied it and read statistics and, you know, and chanted and sang, and people came out of their office and looked at us and couldn't figure out what was going on. And then when it was time to close, when the police told us it was time to leave, you know, they didn't leave. And so they were arrested that day. Okay, next slide. And this is just to show more of our, the rally piece where we prayed and chanted and sang before every nonviolent direct action. We all were trained on, just like King trained all of the people from the 60s, we had nonviolent training too. And, but every direct action had a point. And so this is just a picture from one of the rallies, okay? And then this was just from one of our rallies before we marched out. So you can see it's very diverse. This particular one, I think, where we were actually talking about the disabled, because you can see several people there in their chairs, and they were talking about how they are impacted. So we had a really nice group of supporters, moral witnesses, legal observers, people who were artists and did all our signage, political educators, because all of us were educated before, and nonviolent, and all of them were nonviolent trained. So next slide. Now, the Episcopal Church USA has been at the forefront of the Poor People's Campaign from the very beginning. This is a picture actually in Washington, D.C. So our church and the Jesus movement has been a part of the Poor People's Campaign, like I said, from the very, very beginning. And this is just some pictures from some of the members of the National Cathedral. Next slide, and we can slip it past it too, because it's just a, okay, go ahead and show it, because it is from the National Cathedral. Maybe people want to see that.
And don't let nobody turn me around. No, turn me around. No, don't let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on walking, marching on the freedom land.
We're blessed to be able to have the relationships on different levels, so that as we're having conversations, those who want to serve, the cathedral will be able to help you find an area where your gift or your talent or whatever you're able to give can be supported in this particular manner.
At the cathedral, every week, I hear that we are the house of prayer for all. And house of prayer for all is whether it's on Wisconsin and Mass, or whether it's on the Capitol, whether it is in Jessup Prison, whether it is at Street Church, it is called to be the house of prayer for all. The reason why we participate in events such as this is we're answering the call, I believe, of our own preaching and what we teach and how we act within our community. We're a moral community with a voice. We practice integrity and love of neighbor. This is the gospel walk. This is what we're all supposed to be doing. We're out here living what we preach, what we teach, and what we read in the Bible. If we can't be out here doing this, then we really should pack it up and go home, I think.
So if you did not see this past Sunday, because of your own services, that Reverend Barbara preached at the National Cathedral this past Sunday, it is on the National Cathedral's website or Facebook page. And it's very powerful preaching there too, and how he ties the history to social justice today and in a spiritual way. I do encourage you to go to the National Cathedral's Facebook page and maybe it's YouTube page and watch his sermon from Sunday. So we have been one of the faith leaders because there is a number of denominations that are supporting the Poor People's Campaign and encouraging their congregants to support it. So all of this leads to the fact that last year we had a gathering in Washington, D.C. this time last year, where all of the states came together. There were over 1,000 people there. And we had our presidential candidates who were running for president at the time to come and not to talk to us, but to actually hear our demands and to hear these testifiers. Everyone attended. Were invited, but 9 candidates did show up. But it was announced last year that this year, we would have a moral march on Washington. And, but of course, then the pandemic hit in February and March, and they quickly shifted it to a digital gathering, which is still scheduled for June 20, 2020, which happens to be this coming Saturday. So switch to go 2 slides over for me, if you would. Okay, there you go. And we're calling it We Rise Together. So what is happening now is that we have hundreds, thousands, actually, people who have registered to be a part of this virtual mass meeting on June 20, 2020. It is going to feel like you are at a mass meeting and that you are at a march and a rally, but it is virtual. But you do have to register to be a part of it so that you can get a Zoom link and to connect with it. It's going to happen Saturday, Central Time, 9 to 11, and then it will be rebroadcast on Facebook from 3 to 5 Central. And following the 2-hour broadcast, people will be invited to sign up for a particular committee and to connect with your local chapter or movement. We call it coordinating committees. We have a 14-member coordinating committee in Alabama and about 3,000 people who have signed up in Alabama. I don't know what Florida's numbers are, but everything's online, so you can easily find out. I do encourage you to sign up and to be a part and to get other people to sign up, because this is going to be a historic gathering. Truly, it's going to be a historic gathering. I heard just earlier today, I was talking to a friend of mine in Montgomery, actually, who works for EJI and who knows Al Gore because she's environmental work. And she told me that Al Gore told her he was looking forward to June 20. He was looking forward to Saturday. So he is planning to tune in and actually is going to be a part of it too. So I'm very excited about it. It's been a lot of work. I'm amazed at how they quickly were able to transition to this being a digital event, a virtual event. There's going to be music. There are going to be testimonies from low-income people. I understand that they've created a virtual choir. I don't know how they did that, because one of our theomusicologists, as we call it, is a part of that piece. And you'll have an opportunity to sign up to get more engaged afterwards. So last slide is, I just want to show you how to do that, how to sign up. You just go to, if you Google, just Google June2020.org, which will take you to the website. You just put in your information and your email address, and then you'll receive a Zoom link and other details. Also, we encourage you to search that page, because you will see a yellow button where it says get a digital toolkit. it has all kinds of graphics, things that you can post on your own Facebook page with your picture to encourage your friends on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, if you're into all of that, to also encourage them to join and to watch. So there's a ton of information on that website. And I encourage you to just go to june2020.org and be a part of this new unsettling force that we are creating or reinvigorating to keep Dr. King's vision moving forward.
Thank you, Carolyn, for sharing your insights on how our policies have affected, adversely our poor. Excuse me, one second. I'm sorry, but thank you for your comments and your insight into how our national policies have adversely affected the poor and the low income in this country, and that it does spread across all races. We've got a few questions that have come in that I'd like to give you. First question, what do you say to those that argue that if the millions of people in poverty worked harder, complained less, and prayed more, they would be lifted out of their miserable conditions?
I think that people who have that mentality don't know the poor. I think the poor that I know are the most hardworking people that I've ever been around. I actually work for a nonprofit organization where we work and see and assist and involve the poor actually in their own, lifting up their voices. It's systemic. This country was built on favoring one group over another, and policies are things sometimes that you don't see, that's invisible, that can adversely impact you, and you don't, especially when you're poor and you don't really know why you are stuck. I'll just say this, in Birmingham 3-4 years ago, we worked really hard to get our city council to raise minimum wage. Minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. Now, who in the world can live on that? And they agreed to raise minimum wage to at least $10 an hour and then go to 12 in a couple of years. But we quickly had a legislator in the Birmingham area who happened to be Episcopalian, who went down and passed a bill and got it passed to nullify what Birmingham wanted to do by saying that, and the bill said that no municipality can raise minimum wage on its own. It needed to go to Montgomery. That's a systemic problem. If Birmingham wants to raise its own minimum wage to help out its residents, it should be able to do that. So those kinds of systemic issues, what keep people pushed down, it's not about hard work. Poor people are hardworking, those that I know. And it's about proximity, because if you know poor people, if you're around poor people, if you talk to poor people, you will learn that they are some of the hardest working people that you ever know. But education, sometimes in those communities, are not up to par. Many don't have transportation because to get back and forth, Birmingham, Alabama has a transportation issue. Those kinds of things keep you in a certain economical level that keeps you stuck in poverty. And those are the kind of things that the Poor People's Campaign is fighting against and trying to get changed.
Thank you. Second question. When we spend 53 cents of every federal discretionary dollar on military spending and only 15 cents on anti-poverty programs, what does this say about our society?
Exactly. That we have a moral problem. That we have a moral problem in this country. Reverend Barbara says quite often that those things, those people, I mean, if we are so concerned about war and fighting war instead of our neighbor being able to feed themselves, clothe themselves, and take care of their families, something is wrong with us morally. That's what confronting the moral narrative, that part of our tenets is about. We're trying to get people to take the blinders off, to really see where the things that we value. What do we value in this country? And it should be our people. It should be people over profit. It should be peace instead of war. And so we do need a moral revival in this country. And that's what Reverend Barbara and Reverend Liz traveled the country to first talk about, that we needed a moral revival. That's what it says about that. The fact that we spend 53 cents of our discretionary dollars on war and only 17 cents on trying to lift people out of poverty. That's a problem.
Thank you. One more question. Number 3, what sustains you in your continued drive to address social justice issues when you see the continued entrenchment of poverty in the nation and the deleterious state of racial relations in this country today?
I'm actually energized by this new movement that I see among young people. I grew up here in Birmingham, and you all know about the Children's March and all that happened right here in my backyard, basically. And so I'm excited about this new movement of the young people today that's happening all over the country. And what sustains me is my background. I grew up in segregation in Birmingham, in a community that was quite often bombed, really, by the KKK in Smithfield, a neighborhood in Smithfield. And I couldn't figure out why. Why did people hate us so much? So just my own background and the fight for justice, the fight for what's right, and my Christian faith, I feel like if I'm going to be a Christian, I'm going to be a Christian. I'm going to talk it, I'm going to also walk it. And I think that it's my faith that keep me moving forward. It's my calling. It's what God has called all of us as Christians to move forward and to be authentic in your faith. So it's really my faith. It really boils down to my faith.
Thank you. Another question. Is it really possible to bring about meaningful changes in the policy decisions coming out of state legislators when so many barriers are placed in the way of actually voting at the polls?
Ooh, yes. Voter suppression is real, definitely real. When I chose to put myself up as a moral witness when we were doing the 40 days of action and to be possibly arrested was week 2, when we were lifting up systemic racism and as it related to voting. Because you may remember that Alabama's Secretary of State passed these rules about you've got to have this ID and you've got to do it this way, this way, this way, and then ended up closing DMVs where people can get that special ID. And those polling places were in basically African-American communities. It's so blatant. It was just so blatant. And so and because of my work with the around anti-racism in this diocese, that was the week I decided to put myself up. We must work really hard in order to overcome that, because voting is a right. And we need to all work together. I think the more that we come together and work together and we can overcome these kinds of systemic issues. Jim Wallace, who is head of the Sojourners Movement, says that politicians lift their finger up and see which way the wind blows. And that's the way they go. So it's up to us to blow the wind, to be the wind. And I think when we come together and we speak with one voice, we can change the direction of the wind.
Thank you. One more question. When the Poor People's Campaign came to Mobile in March of this year, I was amazed at how organized, respectful, and caring the volunteers were. Each could discuss their topics with clarity. When Reverend Barber leads the Moral Mondays, leads the Moral Mondays in the capital of North Carolina, all the volunteers are given good training and guidance on how to respond to harsh rhetoric and even being cursed. Do you have any suggestions on how to peacefully protest?
That's one of the things that I really admire about this movement. Even before we did the 40 Days of Action in 2018, we had a year practically of training. They sent a delegation. They were asked each of the states to send a delegation to Washington, D.C. We were trained on nonviolent direct action. We were trained in what we call political education, the why this is important. Because, you know, you don't want it to just be because you're passionate about an issue. You want to know, you want to be able to articulate the why. So we did have lots and lots of training, and we signed an affidavit actually that said after the training that you would be nonviolent. Every state did that. I have tons of the applications in my office right now from people who were trained. So I think that's one of the things that I admire about this movement. And whenever anyone new come on board and join the campaign, we carry them through this training too, because you got to know your why, and you've got to have some dignity about it. And all of this was the same that Dr. King did. So we're just following the guidepost from Dr. King and the movement that he was setting up before he was assassinated. There is a center in Selma called the Selma Nonviolence Center that teaches nonviolent training. There's a curriculum as it was taught back in 1968. So I encourage folk to get in touch with the Selma Nonviolence Center. And so all of the organizers on the national level and all of the organizers on the state level have been trained the same way. And it is very important in a movement that you want to be sustained. One of the things that Reverend Barbara always says is that, and you saw it from the first video I showed, people kind of fell apart when Dr. King was assassinated because he was seen as the leader. And Dr. Barber says, now there are leaders all over the country, so they can't kill us all. That's one of the things he says. So the training is just outstanding, and it's sustainable, because you may hurt one of us, but there are other ones still coming with the same training.
Thank you so much. And Reverend Foster, I want to thank you again for agreeing to speak with us tonight on these important and timely issues. I also want to thank everyone in our audience for tuning in to this Zoom conference. Please be sure to check out our Facebook page, which is the Commission on Racial Justice and Reconciliation, to keep abreast of ongoing activities. Again, thank you everyone for coming, and Reverend Foster, and good night.
Thank you.
Who is? Go away.